Don't see it.
Okay, I believe we are ready. Okay, so thank you so much for being here. My name is Playa Valdez. I'm the educational specialist at Support for Families. If this is your first time here, Support for Families is a nonprofit based in San Francisco that has been around for 40 years, and we provide support, resource, different events for families who have a child with a disability. Everything that we do is for free. And to do that, at the end of the workshop, I am going to share in the chat a short survey that help us to have these workshops free for all. Regarding accessibility, remember that we have interpretation in Cantonese and Spanish, and also we have closed caption in English. Please remember to use the chat to make some questions, and at the end we are going to have some time to also make some questions. But remember that we are recording this and we are going to put the video in our YouTube channel, so try to keep everything as general as you can. And having said that, I will say thank you so much, Disability Rights California, for being here and for being such an amazing partner for us. And I'm going to introduce Raymond.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here today, and also thank you for families for participating. My name is Raymond Kwong. I am an advocate with Disability Rights California. Today I have with me Leilani Pfeiffer. She and I will be supporting our presenters today. Our presenters are Maria Iriarte, one of our senior attorney, Emily Ikuta, one of our staff attorneys, and Mary Rios, one of our senior advocates. So today, before we officially get started, I'm gonna give you all an overview of who we are. Disability Rights California, or DRC, we are a statewide nonprofit agency, and we provide free legal services to people with disabilities with any disability-related issues. We have offices statewide, with our headquarters being in Sacramento, and our attorneys and advocates can help with a variety of issues, from access or discrimination issue with housing, with transportation, with special education, with higher education. We can also help with some employment-related reasonable accommodation issues. We can also help with public health benefits, such as Medi-Cal, in-home support services, and Social Security overpayment issue that relates to work. And within our agency, we also have separate programs, such as our Office of Client Rights Advocacy, or OCRA, that specialize in helping clients of the Regional Center, and our Client Assistance Program, or CAP, they specialize in helping clients of the Department of Rehabilitation. Of course, we have Q&A, questions and answers at the end of the presentation. But if you'd like to speak to one of our advocates on a more a one-on-one appointment, you can feel free to give us a call. Our number is in the chat, is 800-776-5746. Our phone lines are open Monday, Tuesday, Thursdays, and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. If you call outside of those hours, you can leave a message and one of our advocates will return your call. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Raymond. Good evening, everyone. So today we're going to talk about transition services. What does that mean? It means that for the student in special education, it's thinking about what is going to happen after the student leaves the school, either with a diploma or just ages out of school. What's life going to be like? Where is this person going to want to live? What is this person going to want to do? Is there a work goal involved? Is there a goal to go to school and learn something? So many things to think about. Next slide. So when we're talking about transition services, we're talking about the potential of inviting 3 different agencies. The first one, of course, is the school district, because that's where the transition planning happens. And when we're talking about school districts, students in special education can start at the age of 3 through the age of 22. It's also possible if the student is a regional center client to invite the regional center to the transition planning meeting or meetings. And regional center consumers, typically you become a regional center consumer at age 3. There are children who do become regional center consumers before the age of 3, but you could be a regional center consumer for your whole life. There's no age limit. And then the other organization that we can invite to a transition planning meeting is the Department of Rehabilitation if there's an employment goal. And we're going to talk about services available to students who have a vocational goal. Starting at the age of 16, these services could happen. And they're called pre-ETS services. So there's the potential of having 3 different agencies involved when we're talking about transition planning. Next slide. So today we're going to talk about creating a solid transition plan, tips for transition plans, when you're dealing with a school, you're dealing with what are called individual education plans or IEPs. Those are the contracts between the students and the school. When you're talking about regional centers, you're planning with the regional center through what is called an IPP, an individual program plan. And then when we're talking about with the Department of Rehabilitation, we're talking about IPEs, so individual plans for employment. So, IEPs, IPPs, IPEs, they're all contracts with these different agencies. And what's in these contracts, like services and supports, are things that need to happen for the person. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about what happens when you have disagreements. I mean, you have 3 agencies, you might have the potential of 3 agencies that you're working with, and there tends to be a tendency of one agency saying, no, you've got to go here. The other one saying, no, you got to go back there. So we'll talk about that. Next slide. So planning for the future. Let's go on to the next one. Emily's going to talk a lot more about competitive integrated employment. For students who have employment goals, this is a really important concept. You can, even as a person with a disability, strive for working in an environment where it provides competitive integrated employment. What does that mean? That, let's say I'm a person with a disability, it's a real job with real wages. I get paid at least minimum wage. I work with other people who don't have disabilities. I have the same opportunities for promotion, et cetera, as people without disabilities. That's competitive integrated employment. We're going to talk about that a little more, but keep it in mind as we move along. Next slide. Important to say yes to high expectations. A lot of things can be done with the right supports. Something I always tend to say when for example, I'm doing a training on SSI, and I'm talking about disability, and the adult definition of disability involves the ability to work and earn a certain amount of money. And I always say that just because you have a disability doesn't mean that you can't work. In fact, there are many people with disabilities who do work. So, got to have high expectations. Important to set goals and review those goals along the way. People have many options. Of course, like everyone, got to work hard and believe in yourself. Next slide. So a good plan, a good transition plan is specific to the person. There are concrete goals, achievable goals, realistic timelines, It reflects the person's choices. It reflects high expectations. Of course, we need services and supports, right? And review dates along the way because things may need to happen, they may need to change. This plan may be a good plan at the moment that it was put together, but as we move along, things may need to change. So it's good to have a periodic review of your plan in case you need to change your plan, change the services that are in there. Next slide. So tips for drafting transition plans include language about long-term goals. If you have an employment goal, do you want to work in competitive integrated employment? Are you someone who wants to get an education, go to college? Do you want to continue living with family, friends, out in the community? What is it that you want to do? What do you want to do, right, with your life? How do you want to live it? A transition plan is going to identify the agencies involved, the roles of the agencies, the services that are going to be provided, the timelines for accomplishing the goals, and also more very important to know when a service is denied by an agency, you have the right to appeal. And so that means that when a service is denied, then the agency should give you a notice of action. And that notice of action will have your appeal rights to appeal the decision, the negative decision, or the decision that you're not happy with. So, really important to know that and to ask for it should something be denied. Next slide. So I'm now going to turn it over to Mary, who's going to talk about transition planning in the school district.
Thank you, Maria. Hello, everyone. So, Maria talked about the three agencies that are involved in the transition planning. And I think one of the most important ones is the school district because the school district should initiate the transition plan no later than the age of 16. The individual transition plan describes, as Maria indicated, it describes the focus on strengths and the interests. Prior to that, and we indicate here, it should indicate it should include measurable goals. What is it that the consumer or that the student wants to do, as Maria indicated, out in the community? Do they have a vocational goal? Do they want to pursue higher education? All these goals should be written in the transition plan and they should be very specific. Prior to developing the transition plan, there should be some assessments. And the assessments, these are called the transition assessments. And these are to identify where the student is academically to see if the student continues to need the services that they're receiving at the school, and also to identify whether the student needs additional services. Keep in mind that when any assessment is completed by the school district, if you disagree with those assessments, you have the right to request an independent assessment. And what happens is, the school district has two options. They either approve the independent assessment or they would have to file for due process and show that their assessment was an appropriate assessment. Next slide. So what should be included in the transition plan? Goals, as Maria indicated, goals with whether you decide that if you have an employment goal, it should be written down. What is going to take for you to reach that goal? Do you need some training? What is it that you need in order to reach that employment goal? Education, higher education. Are you going to need supports from either the regional center or actually the Department of Rehab? So if you have an employment goal, it's really important to invite the Department of Rehab to the transition plan meeting. And if possible, if you're a regional center client, you also want to invite the regional center. And why do you want to invite these agencies? You want to invite them because you definitely want to include the goals, what supports and services are going to be needed, but who is going to provide that service? Is it going to be the responsibility of the school district, the Department of Rehab, or regional center? When it comes to independent living, does a student, sorry, need independent living skills? These should also be identified in the transition plan. Activities, any instructional services? Do they need instructional services? What is the community experiences? What is it that they want to do out in the community? Do they want to be involved in activities out in the community? You definitely want to include what you want to do out in the community. Any employment related objectives? What is it that the student wants to do? Do they need higher education to pursue their vocational goal? These should definitely be written very specific into the transition plan. And also if related services are needed, if the consumer may need these related services such as speech, occupational therapy, maybe some career guidance. They may not, know what they want to do. So maybe some guidance from some counselor guidance is needed. Transportation, are they going to need transportation to participate out in the community? Or if they have a vocational goal? Counseling, this is not an exhaustive list. So you may need something that's not on this list. Just be prepared when having the transition meeting to identify the services that are needed. Next slide. Independent living skills can help if you need practice in activities such as preparing meals. Do you need to learn how to cook? Do you need some assistance or learning how to shop out in the community? Budgeting, do you need assistance in opening a bank account? These are independent living skills that you may know, that you may need, and Emily is going to talk further about that. Maintaining a home, paying bills, these are really important life activities that take place. And these are some of the goals that you may want to include in the transition plan. Grooming, using public transportation, how to get from point A to point B. You may need a functional evaluation to identify some of these goals to see where you're at. So, again, the evaluation should take place before the transition planning meeting takes place. Next slide. So here is where you want to include your goals and objectives, and you want to make sure that there are benchmarks included. And why do you want to include that? Because you want to see if the supports and services that are included in that transition plan need to be changed. Maybe you want to change your goal. So it's important to identify what it is you want to do and that they're very specific in terms of goals and objectives. There may be a service that you may need that isn't included in the initial transition plan. These are, and if that is needed, if you need to change something in your transition plan, remember that the parents have the right to request an IEP meeting at any time, and the school district should hold an IEP meeting within 30 days. So it's always good to review the transition plan, make sure that the goals and objectives are included, that any supports and services to reach those goals are also part of the transition plan. So here you can include if you have any community, what you want to do out in the community, if you have a vocational goal, what is it that you're going to need to reach that goal? If you want to pursue higher education, you want to indicate what type of higher education? Are you going to go to community college? Are you going to go to the university? What supports and services are you going to need? Are you going to need books? Are you going to need transportation to get to the college? So these are really important things to identify when developing the transition plan. Next slide, and I think that's the other portion. I mean, this is another area that you can identify the top. I mean, you could include whether you have a community goal, a vocational goal, or higher education. You may have a different type of goal that you may want to include, such as independent living. What is it that you're going to need? You want to make sure that again, it's written and it's very specific to what you want to do, to what the student wants to do. Next slide. And now I will turn it over to Emily.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to be covering the regional center portion side of things about their role, where you can turn to them for assistance when it comes to transition planning, and also what kind of services they can provide and the kind of coordination that they should be planning with other agencies. So just first off, anything you get from the regional center, regardless of what the service is and what kind of support or resource that should be written into it, is going to come based off of the individual program plan, the IPP. So the IPP, what is it? Why is it so important, including for transition planning? Well, the IPP is actually a contract. Think of it as a legal document. It lists your goals and the services that you need. You being either if it's a child of yours who is a client of the regional center, or you directly if you're a client of the regional center. And this IPP, or this IPP process, well, it involves the members of your team coming together, discussing those goals, and working out what services and supports do I need to meet those goals. And to get to that process, you have an IPP meeting to add transition-related goals into the document. That includes goals like, I want to eventually obtain competitive integrated employment, live in the community, among other things. That being said, there are some restrictions on services for transition-aged youths, specifically those 18 to 22 who are eligible for special education. I'm going to go in more detail later in the presentation. Your service coordinator, that caseworker that is assigned to you from the regional center, can help you advocate for services from other agencies like the school district or the Department of Rehabilitation. And the regional center is required to help families secure transition services from, well, yeah, the school district. So from there, let's focusing on, where did the regional center come in, or where can you pressure them to come in when it comes to transition planning? Well, regional centers, there's actually have a role in implementing what is called the Employment First mandate. What does that mean? So the Lanterman Act is basically the state law or series of laws that created the whole regional center system. So if you're thinking of like if you're thinking of like the underlying laws, the codes that define the regional centers and what they do, it's called the Lanterman Act. So the Lanterman Act was actually amended. It can be changed, it can be added or revised. And in 2013, it was amended to establish this employment first policy. What that means is that there is this focus, this priority expected of the regional center to increase opportunities for integrated, competitive employment for individuals who have developmental disabilities, regardless of how severe their disabilities are. So, clients of the regional center, the planning team, the group that helps to look into your IPP and formulate it and the goals and such, should consider competitive integrated employment as the first option if you come of working age. Now, that being said, it's your plan. So if you choose goals other than being in competitive integrated employment, you can. But the team still has an obligation to at least consider that, unless you say otherwise. Other transition type priorities are post-secondary education, college, technical or vocational training, internship programs also may be considered toward eventually achieving integrated competitive employment or career advancement. So just really putting this in to emphasize that the regional centers should be prioritizing and seriously looking into ways to encourage access to services to help achieve some stronger economic independence. Now, going from the priority and the policy of the regional center, what are the services that you can get from the regional center? What kind of transition supports and services? You can get living arrangements for after you turn on and after you turn 18 years old. You can get other services and supports for independence. Recreation, this is actually kind of a recent one. Social recreation services are something a regional center can pay for and arrange for you, and that applies to adults as well as children. Even in some situations, financial assistance, again, I'll go more into that, training, advocacy, and much more. And I actually put, if on the bottom you're wondering what that number is, that is one of the laws from the Lanterman Act, Welfare and Institutions Code, WIC. And I put down like the section, just so I think it does help to know, like, okay, where's this information coming from? What does the law say? So one of the independent living services where every regional center, I believe, has a policy on it, and should and something you can ask for is what is called supported living services, SLS for short, because everything's acronyms. But what is it? How would it actually help me with whatever I'm considering in transition planning? So supported living services, they are generally services provided to clients of the regional center, those with developmental disabilities, so they can live in their own home or apartment. SLS also cannot be denied to you based solely on the nature or the severity of your disability. SLS must also be tailored to your needs and preferences. So, okay, given that definition, how would SLS be provided in my situation if I were to request it and be eligible for it? Usually how it works is the regional center, they vendor with an agency, they send out an SLS worker, and that SLS worker helps to train you, show you ways on how you can live independently and maintain the home that you have. Although there's also some flexibility who you can choose for SLS. As for the being eligible for it, well, the requirements are you, the client of the regional center, you're at least 18 years old, so it does apply to adults only. You have expressed directly or through an advocate or a representative, like your family, a preference for SLS. And this is important, you're living in a home that you own or rent. And on the bottom, I just put that note that while you have to be 18 or older to be eligible for SLS, you can actually get that assessment process, because there is an assessment, like what kind of SLS supports do you need? What level of training are we talking about? You can actually get that started before age 18, an actual assessment, which is, I think, a good idea because it gets that planning in place, it gets that consideration in place, so that by the time you do turn 18 years old, you're much getting closer to getting the SLS you need, and also assuming you have your own place to live in. Examples of SLS. So SLS can actually be provided in a range of ways. Again, the ultimate goal being helping you maintain your own home. But it can include, well, assessment, like I said, help in actually finding and maintaining a home. So SLS can actually come in before you actually have a home set up, helping you into like, okay, what options are available? Are they affordable? How would I be able to financially maintain it? It helps you develop employment goals because And it helps to be employed in order to secure and financially support yourself in your own home. Uh, Social, behavioral, daily living skills training, how to learn important skills, training, hiring, and firing. So it is a situation where if you're living in your own space, you're also thinking, do I need to hire an assistant? Do I need to hire some other person to care for a certain need I have? You can actually get help from your SLS on how you can advertise, hire, and even fire those people you need to support you. It can also facilitate participation in the community. So SLS isn't just being literally in the home. It's also, how do I have a life out in the community? It's also can involve securing adaptive equipment and supplies. And there's more. These specific services are listed in the code I put in the bottom, but it's a non-exhaustive list. What that means is, oh yeah, you can get all this stuff. And if there are other services that are specific to your needs that you also require to meet your IPP goals and live in your own home, then the regional center should seriously consider that as part of SLS. So that's what it's meant as non-exhaustive. Like, here's a list, but it could be more. It's not limited to just what's listed there. And also just going more into one of the criteria I mentioned about owning your own home. The individual program plan, they determine eligibility. Sorry, the IPP planning process is what determines SLS eligibility. Regional centers will typically contract with a vendor to coordinate those services needed for you and live in your own home. That being said, you do have the option of looking into, like, okay, what if I'd rather choose an SLS person I really trust, who I know can really be an important resource to train me as I'm trying to live more independently. It could be an agency that's already working with the regional center. It could actually be a family member or a friend if the IPP team approves. So again, you have to make that uh, make that preference known to everyone so they can add it to your IPP, set that up. You may even coordinate the services yourselves. I've had a client where once she actually had advertised, and obtained her own SLS staff after interviewing them. Once the regional center just gave her the money they were like, okay, this is the amount that we, the team, determined is appropriate for SLS. Here's the financial resources. Instead of us arranging it, the client, you find and arrange the SLS. Again, this was a setup. It was under the self-determination program, but it is a possible option where you have more freedom to choose who you want as your SLS provider. But an important thing I want to note, though, while SLS is there to support you living in your own home, you may be wondering, okay, but what if, like, what if I need help affording it? Like, it's important because having my own space involves me being able to pay the rent and mortgage and other living expenses. Will SLS or the regional center pay for that? Unfortunately, no. Generally, regional centers cannot pay your rent, mortgage, lease, or household expenses. The how it's expected is you would obtain and locate a living space, work out what kind of resources you have, including ones you get from employment or ones you get from other agencies or resources, and then having enough. So SLS could include helping you with, like, billing and budgeting, but they are not going to be like straight up paying rent or other living expenses. Now, that said, there are exceptions. It is possible. Regional centers have, in fact, subsidized rent and paid for other types of expenses under certain criteria. And I put that, and that's in the very bottom. The payments are required to meet your unique and specific care needs as described in the IPP. Again, always going back to what's in the IPP and getting that in there. And also, your condition presents a risk to the health and safety of yourself or another person. And I'll give you an example. I had a client where he had his own apartment, had his own home, was able to afford it. He had a job. And then circumstances, though, happened outside of his control. He had no power over it. He lost his job. he didn't have the finances anymore to afford rent, but he was living in his own home. He had SLS there to help him out and go out in the community and maintain his own living space and live as independently as a person as a person with a developmental disability possibly could. And he was at risk of losing that. He was like, if I lose this apartment, I'm gonna end up like, if not on the street, in a group home, completely restricted, very much a step back in my independence and my development. Regional Center helped me out here. So the Regional Center actually came in and agreed to pay for the rent, but on the condition that he make active attempts to find and get to find employment. So he was like, okay, I'm actively making efforts, putting out applications, trying to find new sources of work. In the meantime, Regional Center will continue paying my rent so I don't lose that apartment that I worked so hard to set up with SLS supports. So I'm giving you an example where the Regional Center did actually pay for that kind of expense, but generally don't expect it. You'd have to make a case for it. Now, so you're thinking, you may be thinking, well, SLS is that could be useful, but I don't even have a home or apartment. Can I still get some training, some help learning important living skills without it being actually at the level of either having already found or living in a home? Yes, you can. And so this version of this support is called Independent Living Skills, ILS. These are skills skills that you need to learn to live independently in the community. Important to know, you can receive ILS in any setting. So unlike the last one where it's like, oh, do you have your own home and apartment yet? Or have you found one that you're planning to move to? Oh, okay, no. Well, then SLS doesn't quite apply to you. Not with ILS. You could be living in your parents' house or even possibly a community, a group home type of facility. Although there might be some possible pushback, but it is possible to get ILS in that setting. And how it usually works is kind of not too different from the last one. Regional centers often will have like a vendor or some other agency they're contracted with who sends someone out, an ILS worker, to help teach you important living skills. And usually they come to that conclusion based on an assessment. So what kind of skills do you really want to learn or need to learn? What ones do you want to prioritize based on your current skills and capacity to learn those skills? And it could be what those skills are. Again, huge range: cooking, cleaning, shopping, meal prep, money management, how to use public transportation, being aware of what resources are available in the community, safety, and more. Again, and this one's actually the California Code of Regulations, so 17 CCR. So it's not just the Lanterman Act. There are some other areas in the law that help clarify certain services. And requirements for getting ILS: you're an adult, so once again, 18 or older. And if ILS will enable you to live independently in your own home or achieve greater independence while living in someone else's home. That's it. And it's just a big note. Another note: I have had, I've known clients where if they were living in like a group home setting, like a residential facility, where there was pushback if they requested ILS because there was this belief that, oh, the home you're living in, they're already supposed to be teaching you living skills. They're already supposed to be involved and, helping you learn those important skills to live more independently. And but that's but that in itself is not an automatic bar or an excuse to getting ILS, because I've also known clients who did get ILS while living in a group home because they were able to establish that, no, the group home setting really does not teach me these skills. They haven't really made an active effort to focus and give me that kind of training one-on-one. These are the specific areas I want to learn more about that it's not really possible to get that from where I'm currently living. So just giving you an idea of that it is possible to get ILS even in a community living situation, but you may have to but be prepared to argue for this is why I need this, and the staff at this current home is not teaching me that, and they won't be able to. But important to note, what it's called, and this might be something you guys may have heard from others or directly from the regional center, the potential bar to getting these services, not just transition, but any service really. And that bar is having to go through what is called generic resources or generic agencies. That's another term that regional centers use. So what does this mean? How could this prevent me from getting a service that I'm trying to get from the regional center? So regional centers describe themselves as, quote, the payers of last resort. What that means is that the regional center is prohibited from purchasing any service that would otherwise be available from a generic agency. So an example of a generic agency, a generic resource, are in fact the ones that we are also brought up in this presentation. The school district, big generic resource. If you're asking for a resource in an educational type purpose, for an educational purpose, you would be, and you're a minor and you're still in the school district or getting services within the school district, you're expected to go through them for, if you could get that service from the school first. So that's an example of where it's oh yeah, you got to go through that generic resource. The other one is Department of Rehabilitation, also a generic resource when it comes to work related training or types of supports. Other ones are actually Medi-Cal, Medicare, in-home supportive services, IHSS. Now that being said, it's true. The law does say if you could find the same or similar service from another agency where they could provide that for you, yes, get that, you are supposed to explore, to look into that resource. And then if they don't provide it, or it's not the same service, or it's not sufficient, then you go back to the regional center and ask for that service after establishing that you've tried to go through that generic resource. It is, yeah, payer of last resort. Now, that being said, that does not mean the regional center can just say, oh, go through generic resources. Once you're done with that, come back to us later. No, regional centers are not off the hook. They have to actually actively help you identify and pursue those generic resources. So it's okay, what generic resource am I supposed to apply for? I don't even know, regional center. Help me out here. And also, we've had a lot of situations where regional centers will say, oh, that's a generic resource, go through that. And they were no, that's actually not a generic resource. It's not the same thing. It's not for the same purpose. They've been denied. That agency already said, no, we don't provide it. The most classic example, not in transition, but is regional centers saying, oh, you want more respite hours? Go ask for increase in IHSS, when we were that's not the same service. You don't have to exhaust and appeal to get increase in IHSS to get more respite. They're not the same thing. So just give you an example where the regional center has been wrong about saying what was a generic resource and what wasn't. Another tip to keep in mind is if you're thinking, okay, if this generic resource is a possible option, I'll apply for it, but regional center, I need help right now. This is urgent. And I don't know how long it's going to take, applying for this service from a generic resource. And I don't even know if they're going to actually approve it. So I go all through that time and effort only for that generic resource to say no. In the meantime, I'm not getting services I need. So what you could do is you could request the regional center, could you provide this service in the interim while I'm actively applying to that generic resource, because it's so important that I get this now, and until I figure out whether or not I actually can get it from a generic resource. So regional centers can pay for services while coverage is being pursued, pending a final administrative decision or until commencement of the service. So I've gone over just like independent living, those kinds of services. Now we're getting into like, okay, what kind of support services can the regional center help me out when it comes to competitive integrated employment, CIE? Well, one big program where there's been a big push for regional centers to promote are the paid internship program, PIP for short. So what is the paid internship program? How did it come to be, and how can it help? How can it apply to you? So the DDS, and by DDS, that's the state agency that monitors, funds the regional centers. Is short for Department of Developmental Services. But that agency is also gets the funding to develop this PIP for regional center consumers like you. So they get the money, funnel the money through the regional centers. Regional centers are supposed to set up some paid internship type of planning process. The program provides incentives to service providers to find you an appropriate paid internship. So it's not the regional center themselves like employing you or give or intern providing an internship for you at the regional center. That's not what it is. It's the regional center finding a provider working with a service provider, like a vendor, and being like, we will compensate you and incentivize you to help clients who have developmental disabilities get paired with the right kind of paid internship that is appropriate given their desires, their preferences, and their whatever strengths or weaknesses that they have. So it's basically getting other providers working with an agency to help you find the right consistent internship that supports eventual competitive employment. This paid internship program is available for adults, consumers like you, ages 18 and older. You can actually participate in more. So if it's like, can I get in a part-time paid internship with that's set up with one employer and then another paid internship with another employer that the regional center helps to arrange? Yes, you can. And to get started, if you just to get just to take that first step toward like, okay, I'm interested. I want to get into this. How do I eventually get toward that goal? Ask your service coordinator about it. All the regional centers are supposed to have information about the paid internship program, and also have that included, have that interest or preference reflected in your IPP in writing. These are just some recent changes. There have been some, developments with implementation, well, how regional centers are supposed to implement this paid internship program. So this was something in 2021, just, letting you know, so you have an idea of just the developments in this whole program. You can't work more than 1,040 hours per year in a paid internship. You have to be paid at least minimum wage. So no sub minimum wage stuff going on, at least minimum wage, and whatever paid internship that that the regional center is able to help you secure. The internship or job is in an integrated work environment. So, not in a restricted or segregated type of setting. And the regional center must pay all employer related costs. And I actually included language from a flyer about paid internship from one regional center, just to show like an example of regional centers that are supposed to have resources and info about it. This is from Inland Regional Center. And in that flyer, they specifically say IRC funds the costs of the wages, workers' compensation, and any additional expenses. These wages are paid through an FMS that acts as the employer on record. The FMS is also an agency that contracts with the regional center. IRC will reimburse that FMS for all expenses. Therefore, no cost to the business. Again, this is just to highlight the incentive to for the regional center offering incentives to providers to arrange a paid internship for you. And this is the way that they're helping offset that cost. Further, just helping to clarify what these incentives are and how the whole program is implemented. Regional centers will offer incentive payments to persuade service providers to locate employment for clients of the regional center. Regional centers will pay service providers who are able to find a stable paid internship for you. These payments are not to you as the client of the regional center. It's to an agency to find an internship for you, to find a good internship for you. So on or after July 1st, 2021, regional centers will pay $750 to the service provider who's able to find an internship for you where you are able to intern there for 30 consecutive days. That cost increases if you're able to intern at that you're able to intern for 60 consecutive days. So that's the incentive of like, look, don't just pair me up with any, low tier paid internship that doesn't go anywhere or will only like keep me around for an inconsistent period of time. I want a good, stable paid internship where I'm going to be working there consistently with the ultimate goal of competitive paid employment. And that's how the regional centers set this up to incentivize providers to locate the right kind of internship. There's more info if you want to look more into like other initiatives to advance employment. I put a link. This is to DDS's webpage that goes into like the kind of employment incentives and programs and other things. So just leaving that information there if you want to look it up yourself. Okay, I mentioned it before. There might be transition services that the regional center cannot provide if you happen to be in this criteria of being 18 to 22, still getting services and qualifying for special education. I'll go into more detail about that, but also how there's even exceptions to this, where you could still get these services as long as you show certain criteria. Are there certain services that the regional center can't provide? Yes, if you are 18 to 22 and you are eligible for special education and you have not received a diploma or certificate of completion, the regional center is barred from funding these 5 types of transition services. Again, exceptions, I'll go more into that, but generally this is the services they won't pay for. Day programs, vocational education, work services, independent living programs. Remember ILS provided by, the independent living, the providers. Yeah, that's one of them that you may not be able to get the regional center to pay for if you're if you're in the school system, you're 18, you haven't hit 22 yet, and you haven't gotten a diploma or a certificate of completion. And also mobility training and related transportation services. If you're in a situation where you're like, for whatever reason, you're not in the school system, you're technically still eligible for special ed, but you're not 22 years old yet and you're not currently getting school services, you can ask to return to the school system to obtain these services. You can also still turn to the regional center for help and get that gap funding type of support. Remember, if I apply for generic resources, well, regional center, will you fund it in the interim while I work that out? Applies here too with the school district type of situation. Now, having gone over the prohibition, once again, there's exceptions even to this. Are there exemptions and exceptions that allow the regional center to pay for those lists of services I just mentioned that they couldn't pay for if you're, in the school district 18 to 22, no high school diploma or certificate? Yes, an exemption or exception is granted if any of the following apply. There is a determination during the IPP process that generic services are not appropriate. Remember, generic resources, the school district is a generic provider. If it's determined where it's like, oh, they actually can't meet that need, they actually don't have those services similar to whatever the regional center, that list from the previous slide, well, then now you can get it. But there has to be a determination that that generic resource like the school isn't meeting it. The IPP determines that the needs cannot be met by the educational system, pretty much saying the same thing. And also, if you're in a paid internship program, so that PIP program, if you're actively involved in it, those services that in the previous slide are now open to you. It doesn't matter if you're still in the school district and you haven't hit 22 and haven't gotten a certificate or diploma. You're in a paid internship. Now you can access those lists of services like the ILS and the transportation training and everything else from that previous slide. The regional center also must inform you about these exemptions. So they can't be like, oh, go to the school district, get help from there. No, they got to tell you. And if there is a generic resource available, let's say it's like, okay, fine, you're just going to leave me hanging here, regional center? No, they have to help you access that resource. So again, regional center is not off the hook here. Turning back to you, Maria.
I believe you're muted, Maria.
Oh, yeah. Hi, thanks. Yeah. So the last agency we're going to talk about is the Department of Rehabilitation and the service that's available called Pre-Employment Transition Services for students who have an employment goal and the students are under the age of 22 to prepare them for some career. And so let's see what those services are. So let's go to the next slide. One set of services is called job exploration counseling. So what does that mean? The student can hear speakers talk about their careers or talk to others about different options, learn about the labor market, career assessments, mentors as some of the services that are available under this category. Next slide, I mean. Work-based learning experiences. Maybe they'll shadow someone who's working or do volunteer work, or maybe a paid internship program. And if they're regional center clients, maybe through the regional center, as Emily talked about. Summer jobs as examples of work-based learning experiences. The next category of services. Next slide, please. Counseling and post-secondary education opportunities. The student can talk to people about schools, like talk about colleges and trade schools, take college level classes, do summer programs, visit campuses as part of this type of service. Next slide. Work readiness training, help you develop social skills, understand instructions. What does it mean to be punctual and to plan? How do you get ready for work? How do you get to work? And helping you with resumes and interviewing skills. Next slide. Instruction on self-advocacy, how to gain confidence, make choices, know your rights, know the community resources out there, and know that you can challenge a decision and how to go about it. Next slide. So when you are a student and you're receiving pre-employment transition services, you're not a Department of Rehabilitation client. You are not. But you can become a Department of Rehabilitation client, and you do that by applying online. You can go to the local office, you can attend an orientation. There are many ways to do it. The Department of Rehabilitation has 60 days to determine whether you're eligible. And if so, 90 days to develop. Here again is another contract, the individualized plan for employment. What are the services and supports that are needed in order to reach your employment goal? Next slide. The individual plan for employment through the Department of Rehabilitation. And you're going to notice that these contracts look, what's in them is very similar to, they're just very similar. The IEP, the IPP, the IPE, What are the goals? What are the timelines? Who's gonna provide what service, what services? When will they be provided? How frequently they'll be provided? And everything based on the person's own choices, right? And you see that throughout in the special ed context and also with the regional center and the Department of Rehabilitation. Next slide. Okay, so disagreements and hurdles. Like I said earlier, when you're dealing with more than one agency, you can be, next slide, please, you can be sort of like bounced around, right? One agency will say, no, that's not us. You have to go to the other one. So to try to avoid that as much as possible, you need to kind of figure out what services it is you need and then figure out who's going to pay for those services. Invite these agencies to the transition plan, have them talk to each other, sign releases so that they can do that. You want to schedule meetings when everyone is available. And again, and I stress this all the time, if there's going to be a denial of services, ask for a notice so that you can appeal. And you can always contact us if you get to that point. Next slide. So there's a less formal way of solving problems. You start with, for example, if you're having a problem with the regional center, talk to the service coordinator. If you're not getting anywhere with the service coordinator, maybe the supervisor, maybe the program manager, and make your way up the chain of command, so to speak. If you're going to have a meeting with someone, bring someone with you, maybe for just support or maybe to advocate on behalf of the person. Ask for explanations in writing, ask for denials in writing, ask for, take a note taker, perhaps. You might need to have a note taker. In the special ed context, school districts have, aside from the normal route of going to an informal conference, mediation, and a hearing, perhaps, school districts have alternative dispute resolution systems. So if you don't know what they are, you should contact the district and start there. Try to see if you can resolve the situation or the issue informally. If not, then decide whether in the school context is this a situation where you're going to be filing a compliance complaint, or is this a situation where you're going to be filing for a hearing? And we have on our website 2 manuals, one for special education, which is called the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual, and we'll put the link in the chat. And we also have a manual that's called Rights Under the Lanterman Act for consumers of the regional center or someone who wants to be a consumer. There's chapter 2 has everything to do with eligibility for regional center services. Next slide. The more formal way to resolve something is to contact us. If you're a consumer of the regional center, you can reach out to your client's rights advocate. The Office of Client Rights Advocate is our sister organization. They are not employed by the regional center. They're there to help the consumer of the regional center with issues they may have with the regional center, or someone who wants to be a regional center consumer and perhaps has been denied eligibility. So you could reach out to them. Know what your appeal rights are, appeal by the deadline, do what you need to do. Even if, for example, in the school context, compliance complaints have a deadline. Complain. If you don't complain, things don't change. If there's an opportunity to attend a public meeting to voice your concerns, do it. Or contact your board of supervisors or representatives to help you. Next slide. This is our disability rights intake line. So if you have any issues you want to discuss with us with regard to regional centers or school districts, you can contact us. We do have the contract, it's called the Clients Assistance Program, to help clients of the Department of Rehab if they're having issues with the Department of Rehab, or if you want to become a Department of Rehab consumer, you can contact us too. And so, and there's our website, and there's information regarding the Office of Client Rights Advocacy. So you can call the 800 number for Northern California, or you can even go on the OCRA website and find out who your client's rights advocate is. Next slide. So we have come to the end of the presentation. We're happy to now take questions. I know there are some questions in the chat, so I don't know if Raymond or Lonnie will read them to us.
Maria, this is Mary.